You find yourself gently drifting into another layer of medieval intrigue, where power mingles effortlessly with passion, scandal, and secrets buried beneath royal robes and whispered behind ornate doors. Relax, as tonight you explore the captivating and slightly unsettling tales of kings whose romantic pursuits blurred dangerously with obsession and tragedy. As you listen, allow your mind to drift, effortlessly absorbing history as you ease into restful sleep. Imagine first Charles VI of France, known as Charles the Mad, whose turbulent reign was less about governance and more about surviving his own fractured thoughts. Despite narrowly escaping death at the infamous Ball of Burning Men, Charles's pride wasn't so fortunate. Still, in a fascinating twist, this vulnerable king fathered 12 children, remarkably during brief moments when lucidity pierced through the cloud of his mental anguish. Chronicles remain discreet about whether he recognized these offspring by name, but naming children after fragile glass figurines was wisely discouraged. What Charles achieved, beyond the ruinous rule, was the strange legacy of blending mental torment, fiery entertainment gone tragically wrong, and personal scandal into a surreal theater of royal tragedy. Yet, despite everything, France allowed him to wear its crown, a testament either to loyalty or resignation. Now, gently shift your thoughts toward Peter of Castile, remembered as either Peter the Cruel or Peter the Just, depending entirely on whether you survived his affections or were quietly removed by them. He ruled from 1350 to 1369, and romance, in Peter's court, was an unsettling combination of charm, possessiveness, and politically convenient homicide. His romantic journey began with the enchantingly elusive Maria de Padilla, whose rumored secret marriage to Peter remains historically ambiguous, primarily because the king was simultaneously entering diplomatic marriages to women he promptly imprisoned. One unfortunate victim, Blanche of Bourbon, a French noblewoman, spent her life confined simply because Peter found Maria more appealing, or perhaps Blanche's accent irritated him. Either way, his methods of breaking relationships made even medieval matchmakers nervous. Maria, however, remained the constant fixation of Peter's heart. When she passed, he mourned openly, ordering officials to retroactively recognize her as his lawful queen, perhaps to legitimize their 4 children, or merely to add confusion to an already complicated royal lineage. Peter's affections, however, often transformed swiftly from passionate devotion to brutal obsession. Consider the tale of Dona Juana, a mistress who unwisely attempted to break Peter's hold. Her tragic fate, shared by rivals, cousins, and occasionally unfortunate bystanders who met his gaze at the wrong moment, was a grim reminder of his violent tendencies. Accounts from the era describe Peter nonchalantly lounging with mistresses while calmly observing executions from a palace balcony, behaviors that modern psychology might label as dangerously impulsive or, simply put, deeply disturbing. Still, amidst the shocking darkness, Peter's Castilian court was undeniably intriguing. Gossip flowed abundantly, blurring the thin line between devotion and vendetta. His idea of romantic gestures was less poetry and roses, more surprise annulments and impromptu imprisonments, punctuated occasionally by a dagger's sudden flash. Eventually, Peter's violent ways circled back with tragic symmetry, as his half-brother killed him in a bitter feud that seemed almost therapeutically inevitable. Yet Peter's reputation endures, a compelling cautionary tale reminding us how perilous love can become when power amplifies human flaws. Allow yourself to drift deeper, now arriving in England's royal halls, where King Edward II ruled from 1307 to 1327. History often remembers Edward for 2 notable events: suffering a humiliating defeat by the Scots at Bannockburn, and openly displaying far greater affection for male companions than for his own queen. One act was politically disastrous. The other was fodder for endless courtly gossip. Edward's heart first belonged entirely to Piers Gaveston, a charmingly flamboyant childhood friend who swiftly climbed from favored companion to holder of lavish estates, extravagant titles, and jewels bright enough to overshadow even the Queen's coronation attire. Gaveston's dazzling presence scandalized nobles who viewed his prominence not just as tasteless, but dangerously offensive. Edward's queen, Isabella of France, arrived expecting political partnership and royal dignity. not competition from her husband's ever-present confidant. Isabella's irritation was profound and justified, her substantial dowry having secured her neither the throne nor Edward's heart. Under pressure, Edward agreed to exile Gaveston, only to summon him home again, a royal equivalent of teenage rebellion, punctuated by castles and political intrigues rather than petty arguments. Eventually, the noble's patience evaporated. Gaveston met a grim end, executed not for outright treason, but simply for irritating the wrong men with his persistent presence. Edward's grief was extravagant and genuine, a royal spectacle of mourning clothes, public weeping, and bitter defiance. Yet Edward learned nothing from Gaveston's tragic demise. He soon attached himself fervently to Hugh Despenser the Younger, whose voracious ambition and ruthless cunning made Gaveston seem tame. Despenser accumulated staggering influence, lands, power, entire counties, infuriating nobles further. Isabella's resentment evolved from bitter frustration into active rebellion, driven equally by political outrage and personal betrayal. Joining forces with her own lover, Isabella became Edward's fiercest opponent, invading England and overthrowing her husband with dramatic efficiency. Edward's rule unraveled spectacularly, not merely because of political missteps, but largely due to his emotionally impulsive choices and inability to moderate personal affection with royal responsibility. As you float toward deeper sleep, notice the subtle patterns in these royal lives, the delicate interplay of human vulnerability, unchecked passion, and immense power. Their stories teach us that history is never distant or dull, but rich with vivid reminders of how even the greatest rulers share human weaknesses, desires, and fears. Let this soothing awareness guide you now into restful sleep, gently reminding you that beneath crowns and grandeur lay real people whose journeys, full of intrigue, passion, mistakes, and heartbreak, were not so different from our own. History awaits patiently, its tales of fascinating humanity ready to comfort and inspire you once again. Sleep well, dream deeply, and know you are always welcome to journey back through time's gentle whispers whenever you need rest and inspiration. You gently drift deeper now into another captivating chapter of history, as royal drama meets human frailty in ways both mesmerizing and quietly unsettling. Allow your mind to wander freely, absorbing these true tales while comfortably settling into peaceful sleep. Picture First Edward II of England, whose story takes us into a kingdom where personal obsessions dramatically eclipsed political sense. Edward's reign, lasting from 1307 to 1327, feels less like the careful rule of a powerful monarch and more like a Shakespearean tragedy, or perhaps an ancient reality show best left unaired. Edward's downfall came not from enemy armies, but from a dangerous blend of passion, favoritism, and reckless disregard for royal protocol. His closest companion, Piers Gaveston, was more than just a trusted friend. Gaveston shined brightly, perhaps too brightly, openly flaunting titles, estates, and jewelry that outshone even the Queen at Edward's coronation. This flamboyant spectacle outraged powerful nobles and left Queen Isabella humiliated and resentful. Yet Edward ignored their anger, recalling Gaveston repeatedly from exile like a teenager unable to end a toxic relationship. Eventually, patience snapped, and Gaveston's execution left Edward publicly heartbroken, indulging in royal grief with theatrical weeping and mourning attire, yet tragically learning nothing. Edward swiftly replaced Gaveston with Hugh Despenser the Younger, whose ambition overshadowed even Gaveston's extravagance. The nobles, again enraged, watched Despenser claim entire counties, while Isabella transitioned from neglected wife to avenging angel. Joining forces with her lover, she invaded England, swiftly dethroned Edward, and left him imprisoned and stripped of power. Edward's tragic end is shrouded in dark rumor, including whispers of a particularly grisly demise involving a hot iron poker, though historians wisely avoid dissecting the grim specifics. His reign stands as a poignant reminder. Believing oneself untouchable often leads to vulnerability. Now allow your attention to wander toward the colorful chaos of Wenceslas IV of Bohemia. Do not confuse him with his noble ancestor celebrated in Christmas carols. This Wenceslas was distinctly less saintly. Though officially king of Bohemia and king of the Romans, his reign from the late 14th century was less about governance, and more about embracing the pleasures of royal indulgence. Initially promising, intelligent, multilingual, crowned as a bright young king, Wenceslas gradually chose wine goblets over wise counsel. Decisions were made amidst marathon drinking bouts, negotiations lubricated by beer rather than diplomacy. His court soon became a place where disagreements ended not in peaceful compromise but overturned tables, breadstick duels, and occasionally royal nudity. Indeed, Wenceslas had a particularly relaxed approach to clothing. Chroniclers recorded instances of the king announcing royal decrees entirely naked, save for a sword belt. His reasoning simply being that modesty was for lesser men. Arguing with the naked king holding a sword, unsurprisingly, proved difficult. Romantically, Wenceslas preferred women who served drinks over those who served political alliances. Affairs in his court were less scandalous and more expected, akin to casual employment rather than whispered secrets. When a noble accused him of seducing his sister, Wenceslas calmly offered him another drink. Eventually, the Holy Roman Empire lost patience with Wenceslas's wine-soaked style of governance, gently removing him from his position, a discreet way of firing a king. Yet he somehow remained ruler of Bohemia, tolerated much like an eccentric uncle at family gatherings, quietly managed with rolled eyes and strategic seating arrangements. His legacy is simple. Ruling like every sunrise came with a hangover. Finally, let your thoughts gently turn toward England's Henry VIII, whose reign from 1509 to 1547 is perhaps history's clearest lesson in the dangers of mixing unchecked authority with unchecked desires. Henry is remembered less for statecraft than for his turbulent love life, which famously inspired the phrase, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yet this barely captures the breathtaking drama beneath. His marital saga began with Catherine of Aragon. After 2 decades, convinced God disapproved of their union due to the absence of a male heir, Henry's solution was not self-reflection but rather creating an entirely new church. Anglicanism, effectively born out of royal impatience, became Henry's dramatic excuse to pursue and bullen. And wife number 2 captivated Henry with charm and questionable poetry. She delivered him a daughter, Elizabeth, who would later become one of history's greatest queens, but failed to provide a son. Accused hastily of witchcraft and adultery, and faced execution, swiftly replaced as Henry moved forward emotionally with startling efficiency. Next was gentle Jane Seymour, who successfully bore Henry a male heir, Edward, before tragically passing shortly thereafter. Henry mourned briefly but pragmatically, waiting a mere 11 days before seeking his next queen. Enter Anne of Cleves, chosen from a flattering portrait that disappointingly misrepresented reality. After meeting her in person, Henry famously remarked that she resembled a mare more than a monarch, swiftly arranging a quick and polite separation. Following Anne of Cleves was Catherine Howard, young, spirited, and disastrously indiscreet. Her reign as queen ended tragically, highlighting once again Henry's uncanny ability to mix romance with devastating consequences. As your mind gently winds down, notice how each ruler you've encountered tonight shared the same fundamental struggle. The human temptation to believe power can shield us from consequence, and passion can substitute for judgment. Their stories invite gentle reflection, softly echoing through history's corridors, reminding us that even royal crowns rest upon flawed human brows. Let this comforting awareness guide you deeper into restful sleep. Know that history, rich with whispered wisdom and fascinating humanity, waits patiently for your next visit. For now, rest gently, dream peacefully, and awaken refreshed, ready for tomorrow's new adventures. You're gently sinking deeper now, drifting comfortably into yet another intriguing tale of royal ambitions, unrestrained passions, and human vulnerabilities. As your breathing slows and your eyelids grow heavy, imagine stepping quietly into the vivid and often scandalous bedrooms of some of history's most captivating rulers, where secrets flow as freely as wine and drama unfolds softly, quietly easing you toward peaceful rest. Consider Henry VIII of England, a man whose story blends romance, tragedy, and ambition in ways that still fascinate and frighten historians. Henry's rule, spanning from 1509 until 1547, was not simply marked by political upheaval, but rather by a series of marriages so intense, complicated, and spectacularly disastrous, they still echo in popular culture today. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, dedicated 20 loyal years to him, yet when no male heir arrived, Henry's dissatisfaction led him not toward reflection, but toward drastic action. He defied the Pope, split from the Catholic Church, and invented Anglicanism, reshaping an entire religion just to pursue Anne Boleyn, the magnetic woman who became wife number 2. Anne's charm and wit produced Elizabeth, later one of history's most brilliant queens, but failed to deliver Henry the son he craved. Tragically, accusations of adultery swiftly followed, sealing Anne's fate with a swift execution. Henry's mourning period was astonishingly brief. Soon Jane Seymour arrived, gentle and compliant, providing Henry the desired heir, Edward, but losing her life in the process. Henry's grief lasted just days before his wandering I settled upon Anne of Cleves, a woman whose portrait enchanted him, but whose reality left him deeply disappointed. Politely calling her appearance unfortunate, he hastily arranged an amicable separation. Then came Catherine Howard, youthful, spirited, and tragically indiscreet. Charged with adultery, arguably understandable given Henry's declining charm, she faced the executioner's blade. Finally, Catherine Parr became wife number 6, wise enough to outlast Henry through careful diplomacy, patience, and an impressive ability to sidestep accusations gracefully. By his death, Henry had depleted England's treasury, feasted through vast herds of livestock, and turned his royal court into an extravagant drama where love, betrayal, and executions intermingled seamlessly. His reign offers a timeless lesson. Unchecked passion combined with unchecked power creates consequences no kingdom can ignore. Let your mind wander gently now toward France, where Francis I ruled from 1515 to 1547, a monarch embodying the Renaissance spirit of culture, art, and undeniable romantic mischief. Charming, intelligent, and deeply cultured, Francis attracted some of history's greatest minds, like Leonardo da Vinci, transforming France into a luminous beacon of art and learning. Yet, behind the splendid palaces and inspiring cultural advancements lay a king utterly unable to resist romantic temptation. Francis's royal court was both elegant and scandalously vibrant, resembling a sophisticated matchmaking service rather than a political establishment. He employed noble ladies under the gentle title ladies-in-waiting, though their primary role seemed less about royal etiquette and more about personal companionship. Diplomatic negotiations frequently unraveled because Francis inadvertently seduced an ambassador's wife, a habit he didn't bother hiding. Famously candid, Francis declared openly that French kings should excel equally on the battlefield and in romantic exploits, a claim that stunned ambassadors and rivals alike. His legendary mistress, Françoise de Foix, was sharp-tongued, clever, and openly teased him, yet survived, protected by his admiration. When Françoise's star faded, and Episalou de Hailly effortlessly rose in prominence, wielding political influence through intellect and charm. Even Francis's adversaries noted his dangerous charm. Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire once observed, half-jokingly, that Francis posed a greater threat in romance than in warfare. The French king likely embraced this remark as flattery. Despite expensive wars and even costlier romantic pursuits, Francis managed surprisingly effective governance. His legacy is a whirlwind of silk gowns, whispered scandal, and fragrant court intrigue, a monarch whose charisma both dazzled and disrupted history. As you drift further into restful calm, picture Alfonso XI of Castile, whose reign from 1312 to 1350 was overshadowed entirely by a singular passion: his obsessive affection for Leonor de Guzman, a captivating noblewoman whose presence eclipsed his politically strategic marriage to Maria of Portugal. Maria's royal lineage and impeccable connections meant little compared to Leonor's irresistible charm. Alfonso openly displayed his mistress as though she were queen herself, awarding her estates, building luxurious palaces, and making her central to his court. Meanwhile, Maria sat abandoned at royal events, a queen in title only, observing quietly as Alfonso lavished attention on another woman. Leonor was no mere romantic distraction. She became politically powerful, negotiating treaties, commanding respect, and producing heirs at a remarkable rate, securing her position in court with unshakable confidence. Alfonso rarely attempted even diplomatic gestures toward Maria, spending just enough time with her to maintain appearances, before eagerly returning to Leonor's side. Maria's father, the King of Portugal, understandably furious, nearly resorted to war over Alfonso's shameless neglect of his daughter. Imagine tensions escalating so drastically over romantic betrayal that armies nearly marched, not due to territory or politics, but purely wounded family honor. Yet Alfonso remained defiant, parading Leonor openly, unaffected by diplomatic outrage. It ultimately took a devastating plague, the Black Death itself, to end Alfonso's unyielding infatuation. After his demise, Queen Maria, seizing her moment, swiftly imprisoned and executed Leonor. Historians debate Maria's actions, some calling them cruel, others simply labeling them justice, long overdue. As your eyelids grow heavier, remember tonight's gentle journey through these royal lives as a comforting reminder of humanity's universal struggles: passion, power, longing, regret. Even kings and queens, beneath glittering crowns and silken robes, remain undeniably human, each carrying flaws, vulnerabilities, and dreams remarkably similar to your own. Now, allow yourself to drift into deeper, restorative sleep, secure in the gentle knowledge that history, rich with drama and wisdom, will always await your return, ready to share its timeless secrets once again. Sleep peacefully, dream beautifully, and awaken refreshed, inspired by the hidden whispers of the past. You gently ease into another soothing chapter, drifting deeper now into history's shadowy corridors, where royal secrets whisper softly through the halls. Imagine quietly entering palaces where passions flared, ambitions intertwined, and morality often depended on who wore the crown. Allow your curiosity to guide you comfortably toward restful sleep, as tonight's true stories softly unfold. First, consider Philip IV of France, famously known as Philip the Fair, not for kindness, but rather for his handsome features that concealed a heart governed by relentless ambition. Outwardly, Philip portrayed a pious, morally upright king, devoted to reform and righteous authority. Yet privately, he ran his kingdom like a carefully staged drama, filled with secret trials, whispered betrayals, and double standards that made even medieval chroniclers uneasy. His most scandalous chapter, known as the Tour de Nesle affair, began not with Philip himself but with his vigilant daughter Isabella, the same formidable queen who later dethroned her husband, Edward II of England. Isabella observed her sisters-in-law behaving suspiciously with several knights, sharing secret meetings and exchanging intimate gifts behind closed castle doors. Troubled, Isabella reported these indiscretions to her father, whose response was swift, dramatic, and ruthless. Philip conducted investigations without subtlety, imprisoning his daughters-in-law, publicly humiliating them by shaving their heads and stripping away their titles. The knights involved faced horrific punishments, their public executions becoming chilling spectacles meant to enforce moral authority. Yet, behind Philip's harsh judgments lay whispers of profound hypocrisy, rumors of his own carefully concealed mistresses hidden within secret chambers of royal palaces. Some said Philip discreetly maintained an entire group of women, not merely for personal enjoyment but also to entertain influential guests, a unique interpretation of diplomatic hospitality. But unlike the women he harshly judged, Philip's own infidelities remained safely untouched by scandal, shielded behind his royal prerogative. Philip wielded morality selectively, using accusations of heresy and immorality strategically to seize wealth and control, notably in his famous persecution of the Knights Templar. Although portrayed as an act of divine justice, historians quietly acknowledge Philip's true motivation: their considerable riches. This masterful blending of righteousness and greed defined Philip's legacy. A handsome mask hiding ruthless intentions, a king whose morality bent neatly around his ambitions. Now, gently allow your thoughts to drift toward another captivating figure: Sigismund of Luxembourg. He was not just a king. He collected titles as eagerly as fine wines, eventually reigning as King of Hungary, King of the Romans, and Holy Roman Emperor from the late 14th to mid-15th century. A shrewd politician fluent in multiple languages, Sigismund was widely respected for his political wisdom and charm. Yet beneath his statesmanlike exterior lay a private life that could embarrass even the most daring court poets. Married formally to Queen Mary of Hungary, Sigismund approached marriage as little more than a convenient social arrangement. His heart, or perhaps something less romantic, wandered frequently, passionately, and openly. His numerous relationships included noble women, maids, and even, intriguingly, an Italian singer who seemed to anticipate the spirit of opera centuries early. At court, keeping track of Sigismund's numerous affairs became so challenging that historians suggest his courtiers resorted to numbering his mistresses rather than remembering their names. These fortunate women enjoyed luxurious accommodations, personal servants, and even, in one notable instance, a private chapel, either profoundly romantic or shockingly inappropriate, depending on one's taste for blending sacred space and scandalous affairs. Sigismund also enjoyed playful disguises, donning the attire of a humble merchant to mingle anonymously in towns, charming local women with tales spun from imagination. Remarkably, despite traveling with an entourage marked clearly with royal insignia, his disguises went conveniently unnoticed, a tribute perhaps to his immense charm or simply to the indulgent blindness of his subjects. Yet amid his chaotic romances and whimsical disguises, Sigismund governed effectively, leading crusades, presiding over the Council of Constance, and skillfully navigating imperial politics. His effortless charisma made him immensely popular. Even ambassadors noted, with both admiration and mild concern, his habit of greeting every woman with equal warmth, regardless of social status, a behavior modern sensibilities might deem progressive or troublingly inappropriate. Sigismund's reign embodied a curious paradox. A man who publicly exemplified royal dignity and privately pursued pleasures with almost artistic enthusiasm. His legacy was not simply political. It was cultural, a living embodiment of Renaissance duality, equal parts statesman, strategist, and charming rogue. As you drift softly toward sleep, consider how history gently reveals human truths. Behind every royal facade lies the same yearning, vulnerability, and complex desires that define every human heart, including your own. These tales remind us gently that history, beneath all its grandeur and tragedy, is woven quietly from threads of universal humanity. Now, rest deeply, allowing tonight's gentle journey through history's secret whispers to guide you peacefully toward rejuvenating sleep. Tomorrow awaits fresh discoveries, new mysteries ready to softly illuminate your dreams once more. Sleep comfortably, knowing history's gentle stories will patiently await your return. You find yourself gently drifting further into history's calming embrace, softly entering royal chambers where luxury met scandal, ambition mingled quietly with passion, and rulers were often less noble than the crowns they wore. Relax your mind as we journey into stories that invite curiosity, softly drawing you deeper toward peaceful rest. Let your imagination first enter the glittering court of Louis XV of France, affectionately known as Louis the Beloved. Louis reigned from 1715 until 1774, though perhaps reigned paints too disciplined a picture. His era felt less like governance and more like an endless royal party, filled with whispers of secret rendezvous and champagne-soaked gossip beneath Versailles gilded ceilings. Initially promising, handsome, charismatic, and eager to continue the legacy of his great-grandfather, Louis XIV, this youthful king soon discovered distractions more captivating than statecraft. He established the Parc aux Cerfs, a discreet house near Versailles, where a revolving cast of young women were quietly auditioned, gently replacing each other like flowers changed seasonally in palace gardens. Courtiers, one imagines, must have kept careful notes, perhaps discreetly tracking mistresses by number and tenure. Yet amidst these countless companions, one woman stood apart, Madame de Pompadour, beautiful, brilliant, and unusually powerful. When their intimacy eventually cooled, Louis, rather pragmatically, built a second retreat, maintaining Pompadour's presence for intellectual and emotional connection, and the Parc aux Cerfs purely for physical indulgence. It was a curious arrangement, part practicality, part extravagant royal whim. Each woman who passed through Louis's discreet world received lavish gifts, titles, and occasionally even comfortable retirements, making Versailles perhaps Europe's most peculiar internship. Secretive, scandalous, yet oddly structured. Meanwhile, Queen Marie Lesksinska quietly faded into palace life's background, treasured like antique furniture. Too costly to discard yet silently relegated to a forgotten corner. The scandal became so ordinary that ambassadors joked not about whether Louis had mistresses, but rather how many new faces appeared each month. Yet despite lavish banquets, frequent pregnancies, and awkward silences with his queen, Louis sincerely believed himself a wise and capable monarch. Though France endured under his reign, the excess and negligence he normalized quietly paved a dangerous path toward revolution. One his grandson Louis XVI would later tread disastrously. When Louis XV passed, France lay deeply indebted, the royal court disillusioned, and his memory etched with irony. Adored by countless women, yet silently cursed by accountants. History gently reminds us through Louis's story that unchecked desires, cloaked in elegance, quietly erode foundations of stability. Now, gently shift your thoughts northward to Denmark, softly stepping into the curious reign of King Christian VII, who technically ruled from 1766 until 1808, though perhaps ruled is overly generous. Christian's heart held little interest in governance, far preferring whimsical escapades, often chasing servants playfully with cutlery or whispering secrets to imaginary friends. Suffering profoundly from severe mental illness, likely schizophrenia, Christian was less a ruler and more a gently tolerated figurehead, supervised carefully by anxious courtiers. His wife, Caroline Matilda of Great Britain, entered marriage expecting traditional royal stability. Instead, she found herself married to a man who publicly behaved with startling unpredictability, disappearing mid-dinner to ride imaginary horses down palace corridors, laughing softly to himself. Whether Caroline's patience or Christian's grasp of reality snapped first remains uncertain, but their marriage soon dissolved into quiet desperation. Enter Johann Friedrich Struensee, Christian's ambitious physician, a man whose influence quickly extended far beyond medicine. Intelligent, charismatic, and quietly manipulative, Struensee soon assumed Denmark's true governance, effectively managing the kingdom while gently steering Christian through puppet shows, toy swords, and softly whispered guidance away from dangerous sharp objects. Perhaps inevitably, Caroline Matilda found solace and passion in Struensee's arms, forming history's most peculiar love triangle. Two deeply involved, and the third blissfully indifferent, murmuring gently in the background. Struensee and Caroline even produced a child, quietly attributed to Christian but clearly bearing Struensee's imprint. Under their stewardship, Denmark briefly transformed into an enlightened yet scandalous political experiment. However, royal courts rarely permit secrets to flourish unnoticed. Christian's jealous mother-in-law orchestrated a swift, ruthless coup, capturing Struensee, who faced a cruel execution, and exiling Caroline Matilda, her reputation shattered. Christian quietly resumed life as a gently supervised liability, spending his remaining years softly sheltered from power, an emperor in name only. Christian's reign remains etched in history not for accomplishments, but for the surreal absurdity of it all. A king who ruled nothing, a queen caught in tragic romance, and a physician whose ambition tragically overstepped. Their story gently illustrates humanity's enduring complexities. Ambition, vulnerability, passion, and quiet despair. As you drift comfortably closer to sleep, remember these gentle historical whispers, quietly reminding us that beneath royal splendor lie deeply human truths, flaws, desires, and frailties shared universally across time. Now, allow your eyelids to grow heavy, your breathing slow, as history's gentle murmurs carry you softly into restful dreams. Rest well, knowing these stories wait patiently, ready to welcome you back whenever you desire another quiet journey into history's comforting embrace. Sleep deeply, peacefully, and dream gently of lives past, softly illuminating your own journey ahead. You softly continue your journey deeper into history, guided by whispers of forgotten scandals and royal misadventures. Feel your breath gently slow, as your imagination quietly explores corridors of palaces where passions danced openly, power mingled playfully with scandal, and rulers behaved in ways no royal handbook would recommend. Relax. Allow curiosity to lead you comfortably into restful dreams. First, picture Charles II of England, the so-called Merry Monarch, whose reign from 1660 to 1685 felt less like governance and more like one endless celebration. Returning triumphantly from exile, Charles declared his intent clearly. England had endured enough seriousness. It was time for royal revelry, mistresses, and perhaps some optional attire at courtly balls. Parliament, tired from strict Puritan rule, gave reluctant but amused consent. Charles didn't merely enjoy the company of women. He openly elevated mistresses to a position resembling national celebrities. Nell Gwyn, the clever actress known for humorously calling herself the Protestant, distinguished herself from other mistresses with iconic wit and charm. Another, Barbara Palmer, the Countess of Castlemaine, held a permanent presence at court, openly residing within royal apartments and mothering several acknowledged royal offspring. Charles made no effort toward secrecy. He built special passageways at Whitehall to discreetly usher mistresses past ambassadors, paid them government pensions, and displayed them publicly with pride. Queen Catherine of Braganza, his dignified yet quietly neglected wife, endured patiently, never producing an heir but also never openly protesting. Charles even praised her gently for never causing trouble, a questionable compliment highlighting the uneasy balance in royal marriages. His many illegitimate children received lavish titles and generous estates, enjoying birthday celebrations fit for legitimate heirs. Ironically, Charles's actual royal line remained childless, as though fate quietly chuckled at his expense. Yet, despite the moral ambiguities, England adored Charles for reopening theaters, lifting Puritan restrictions, and transforming the monarchy into dazzling entertainment. Upon his death, his final concern wasn't state affairs, but simply ensuring dear Nell Gwyn's financial security, proof that for Charles, life itself was the ultimate royal spectacle. Now, let your thoughts drift gently northward, toward Sweden, and meet Eric XIV, whose short reign from 1560 to 1568 was overshadowed by paranoia, poetic drama, and spectacularly tragic romantic choices. Eric began promisingly, handsome, intelligent, passionate about arts and astrology, a king who might lovingly compose verses beneath starry skies. Unfortunately, his trust in the stars never guided him wisely. Initially, Eric ambitiously pursued England's Queen Elizabeth I, proposing repeatedly with unwavering persistence. Elizabeth politely declined, ignored, and finally fully ghosted him. Undeterred, Eric sent elaborate portraits, a 16th century equivalent of boldly sliding into royal DMs. Yet Elizabeth remained unimpressed. Rejected royally, Eric turned toward simpler affection, becoming passionately enamored with Karen Mansdotter, a common jailer's daughter whose humble background scandalized the Swedish nobility. Defiantly marrying and crowning her queen, Eric spiraled into emotional instability, imprisoning suspicious nobles and dramatically attacking courtiers who appeared even vaguely critical of his queen. His mental instability climaxed tragically in the Stour murders, an infamous dinner party ending violently when Eric himself suddenly attacked and killed a nobleman, convinced of imagined betrayal. By then, his paranoia had consumed him entirely, hearing invisible whispers and disguising himself to spy upon his bewildered council. The nobility intervened forcefully, confining Eric quietly to isolated imprisonment, where he spent his remaining days penning haunting poetry to Karen, ranting occasionally about imagined conspiracies, and undoubtedly pondering regretfully about that ill-fated dinner. Eric's tumultuous reign taught Sweden valuable lessons, cautionary tales about entrusting crowns to kings whose minds drifted too far among the stars. Finally, allow your imagination to venture gently toward Ferdinand I of Naples, also known as Ferdinand of Aragon, whose mid-15th century rule seamlessly combined charisma with chilling brutality. Ferdinand had an unsettling hobby, an activity so bizarre and chilling that dinner invitations from the royal palace were politely avoided. Yet, Ferdinand's presence was undeniably magnetic. He charmed guests effortlessly, masking sinister tendencies behind engaging smiles. His rule mixed gentle allure with hidden cruelty, creating a curious blend of fascination and fear. While historical details quietly remind us to approach Ferdinand's story with caution, they equally remind us how power often concealed unsettling secrets behind regal facades. As your thoughts gently soften, guided by tonight's gentle journey, consider how each ruler's story quietly reveals universal truths. Beneath glittering crowns lay human vulnerabilities, desires, fears, flawed ambitions, common threads binding us gently across generations. Allow these quiet historical whispers to comfort you, reminding you softly that beneath all human grandeur lies shared humanity. Sleep now, rest peacefully, and dream gently. History's mysteries will wait patiently, softly ready whenever you desire to return once more. You drift deeper now, your mind gently exploring history's shadowy halls, where truth mixes effortlessly with legend and heroes walk softly beside villains. Tonight, relax as we unravel quietly fascinating stories of rulers whose lives blended charisma with darkness, holiness with steel, and ambition with unwavering faith. Imagine First Ferdinand I of Naples, a man whose reign balanced efficient governance with chilling eccentricities. Outwardly cultured, Ferdinand carefully stabilized his kingdom's economy and swiftly crushed rebellions, ruling Naples with an iron fist wrapped in velvet gloves. Yet beneath his charm and administrative prowess hid a deeply unsettling hobby, one that whispered warnings to anyone daring to challenge him. Where other kings might exile traitors or imprison rebels, Ferdinand preferred an approach that was terrifyingly unique: human taxidermy. Beneath his castle lay a chamber known ominously as the Black Room, a secret museum filled with embalmed bodies of executed nobles posed in permanent expressions of fear and regret. Ferdinand himself often led visitors, foreign diplomats, ambassadors, potential conspirators, through this grim gallery, calmly narrating the crimes and failures of each preserved enemy. Guests reportedly fainted or fled, which amused Ferdinand endlessly. Few things could persuade obedience faster than seeing one's predecessors frozen in eternal punishment. Yet Ferdinand's personal life echoed the same mix of brilliance and scandal. His romantic adventures knew no boundaries of class or discretion, fathering numerous illegitimate children who conveniently appeared with new lands and noble titles. Official queens were respected but politely sidelined, as Ferdinand treated marriage vows more like polite suggestions rather than obligations. His lavish banquets often doubled as stages for public flirtations, leaving ambassadors bemused and nobles quietly resentful. Still, his popularity endured. People admired strength, nobles feared defiance, and enemies who glimpsed the Black Room rarely challenged him again. Ferdinand's legacy was oddly balanced. He left behind a stable, orderly kingdom, but also a haunting warning preserved behind glass cases. He passed peacefully, secure in the chilling knowledge that fear could govern just as effectively as loyalty. Allow your imagination now to gently drift to a different world, a distant, troubled time. The year was 1119. Jerusalem, reclaimed by crusaders, stood proudly yet precariously, drawing devout pilgrims believing safety was finally theirs. But beyond the city's gates lurked chaos. Bandits waited along roads, Muslim raiding parties ambushed caravans, and the hopeful dream of secure Christian pilgrimage began to crumble under brutal reality. In these dark times emerged a humble knight named Hugues de Payens. Alongside 8 companions, he swore an extraordinary oath, not to king nor noble lord, but directly to God. They pledged their lives as protectors of pilgrims, embracing not just warfare but monastic devotion. No gold, no wives, no estates, just swords, horses, and unshakable faith. Thus was born an order bearing the name Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, shortened mercifully by history to the Knights Templar. Their beginnings were humble yet fierce. King Baldwin II granted them quarters on Jerusalem's sacred Temple Mount, beside the remnants of Solomon's ancient temple, a symbolic location that deepened their holy resolve. For nearly a decade, these warrior monks lived in disciplined poverty, borrowing armor, sharing horses, training rigorously, and battling fearlessly. slowly building an unparalleled reputation. Soon their unusual mixture of religious austerity and military valor captured the attention of Christendom's most influential spiritual leader, Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard, respected widely as the guiding voice of the age, recognized divine potential in these rugged, devoted men. At the Council of Troyes in 1129, Bernard personally drafted their monastic rule, infusing strict religious discipline with martial vigor, praising the Templars as a new knighthood, warriors fighting purely for divine glory rather than earthly rewards. Endorsed by Bernard and officially sanctioned by the Pope, the Templars swiftly transformed from obscure pilgrims' guardians to revered holy warriors. Wealth poured into their coffers, noble sons left comfortable lives to join them, and their iconic white cloaks emblazoned boldly with blood-red crosses became symbols of both holiness and strength. Yet, ironically, their greatest privilege, papal independence, would later mark them tragically for persecution. Officially blessed, disciplined, and utterly fearless, the Knights Templar became Christianity's frontline defenders. In the fragile Crusader kingdoms surrounded by hostile Islamic forces, their code was brutally clear. No retreat unless hopelessly outnumbered. No ransoms, no hesitation, and above all, no fear. Their rise marked a powerful shift in medieval warfare and spirituality, transforming humble monks into history's most legendary warriors. Tonight, as your breathing slows and sleep gently calls you deeper, softly reflect on how these stories reveal quiet truths of humanity. Behind crowns and swords, behind prayers and banners, were men whose choices echoed courage and fear, strength and fragility. Human qualities shared quietly across ages. Rest comfortably, knowing history's whispers will remain here for your return. Soft, patient, always ready to inspire you anew. Sleep deeply, dream peacefully, and awaken refreshed, guided gently by the past's timeless wisdom. You slip into the story like a rider into dusk, armor quiet, heartbeat steady. You're watching an order of men who believed a good death was a doorway, not an ending, soldiers who prayed with the same intensity they charged. The Knights Templar drilled every day, blades flashing like sunrise on steel, convinced that falling in battle was the purest tithe they could pay. Where other knights chased ransom and reputation, these riders moved with a frightening certainty. They weren't fighting for loot, they were executing a mission. When the Second Crusade unraveled in arguments outside Damascus, their lines didn't. While nobles bickered, Templars cut through chaos, turning retreat into order and rout into legend. Muslim commanders learned to spot them instantly. Those white cloaks slashed with a crimson cross, riders who didn't break, didn't bargain, and didn't beg. They fought, but they also fortified. From the Levant's rocky ridges sprang an iron lattice of fortresses. Tortosa standing watch by the sea, Safed crowning the hills, Bagras guarding the passes. These were not pretty palaces. They were machines of survival. Cisterns hidden deep, murder holes over gates, corridors designed to swallow armies whole. When everyone else ran, the Templars stayed, buying time with blood or holding until the last torch guttered out. Their obedience flowed upward to one throne only, the papal seat. Kings couldn't command them, barons couldn't bribe them. Their Grand Master, chosen from their own, gave the orders, and that sovereignty in spirit made rulers uneasy. Their rituals were closed off, their vows austere, their silence deliberate. To admirers they were holy steel, to rivals a shadowed brotherhood. 9 ragged knights had become a continental network, and fame, as always, invited jealousy. They never set out to finance empires, but war, faith, and practicality forged a different kind of sword in their hands. Money. Donations flooded in, fields, flocks, entire villages handed over by lords eager to earn favor with heaven. The Templars didn't simply hoard wealth, they organized it. Commanderies sprouted across Europe, each run like a disciplined estate. Ledgers tracked grain, wool, rents, and tithes with monkish precision. Coins collected in England could be feeding a garrison outside Acre within weeks. Logistics on a scale no one had attempted. Then came their quiet revolution, the letter of credit. A pilgrim could hand over gold in Paris, receive a coded script, and claim the same value in the East. safer than dragging a treasure chest across bandit country. Fees were small, trust immense, defaults non-existent. Before Switzerland thought to brand itself discreet, the Templars were already the vault of choice. Guarding crown jewels for France, managing papal funds, ransoming captured nobles, and yes, lending to monarchs who would later sharpen blades against them. Their chapels were plain, their habits simple, but beneath that humility hummed an invisible engine of chests, carts, and ciphered notes that touched nearly every purse in Christendom. They insisted they were not bankers, only servants of God, but kings saw something else. Power without leash. Suspicion swelled. Whispers thickened. And whispers, in palaces, are preludes to knocks at midnight. Meanwhile, the sand beneath their fortresses kept shifting. Those crusader states, outre-mer, were always fragile shells, cracked by each new tide. Rising over that tide stood Saladin, the brilliant unifier of Egypt and Syria, a commander with one unwavering aim: Jerusalem reclaimed. In 1187, on the parched slopes near Hattin, his vision came within reach. The heat was merciless. The Christian army dehydrated, disoriented, penned in by fire and steel. The Templars held their ground until holding was no longer humanly possible. Surrounded, outmaneuvered, their lines collapsing under the weight of inevitability. What followed was slaughter. Hundreds of knights, Templars and Hospitallers alike, fell captive. Their courage had names. Their enemies learned them. Their crosses, once symbols of unstoppable advance, became targets for executioners' blades. Saladin spared few of them. Mercy was for those who could be ransomed, not for men who swore never to yield. You can almost feel it now, the shift from awe to fear, from reverence to resentment. An order born in poverty, forged in discipline, and baptized in battle had become a paradox. Warriors without a war, monks without cloisters, treasurers without a kingdom. And in that uncomfortable space, knives began to glint. Because in the end, power that answers to no earthly crown invites a very earthly reckoning. Let that thought settle as your breathing slows. The clatter of hooves fades, parchment rustles quiet, and torchlight thins to embers. History's riders ride on, and you, somewhere between wakefulness and dream, carry their story gently into the night. Rest now. The past will wait, armored in silence, until you're ready to ride again. You feel the heat of Hattin on your face again. The air shimmering, canteens dry, banners drooping, while a line of white mantles holds just a breath longer than human bodies should. Most captured knights that day were worth a ransom. The Templars were worth a warning. Saladin spared almost none of them. To him, these men were blades too sharp to sheath. Jerusalem's fall in 1187 wasn't only a lost city. It was a ripped-out heartbeat. The shrine they'd vowed to guard was gone, and with it, the anchor of their identity tugged loose. They didn't collapse. They regrouped. Reinforcements landed with the Third Crusade, and Richard the Lionheart, tactician, showman, king, leaned hard on Templar discipline. Yet even his ferocity couldn't pry Jerusalem back. Year by year, the Christian map in the east shrank. Antioch dimmed, Tripoli flickered out, and finally Acre, the last bright ember, hissed into darkness in 1291. Forced onto Cyprus, the order set up new headquarters and stared at the sea like veterans who'd outlived their war. The castles they built now held more dust than soldiers. Their rule book still barked commands, but the purpose behind each line blurred. What do warrior monks do when there's no holy ground left to bleed on? Rival orders, Hospitallers among them, stepped into roles the Templars once owned. Whispers trailed the white cloaks across Europe. Prideful, secretive, rich. Relic hoarders, said some. Arrogant, said others. The East had forged them, scorched them, hardened them, and then abandoned them. They still had money, networks, and a myth that made barons twitch, but the war that justified everything had vanished. A sword without a battlefield, a brotherhood without a crusade. In that vacuum, eyes narrowed, envy sharpened. Power, unmoored, invites predators. By the early 1300s, the order was paradox itself. Feared, wealthy, organized, and suddenly unnecessary. No crusade in sight. No city to reclaim. A military machine idling at the curb. a religious house with no parish. Worse, they answered to no earthly king. That last fact glowed red on one man's ledger: Philip IV of France. The fair spoke to cheekbones, not conscience. Wars against England and Flanders had gutted his coffers. His biggest creditor? The very knights whose shields he could not command. Philip hated owing anyone, especially men armored in papal privilege. The Templars held estates inside France, yet paid him no tax. They had their own courts, their own fortresses, their own chain of command that bypassed every royal decree. To Philip, they were a rival state tucked inside his borders, untaxable, unbreakable, unbearably solvent. So he did what desperate rulers do best. He whispered first, then he struck. Rumors began to circulate with surgical precision. Idols in hidden chapels, spitting on the cross during initiations, obscene rites, devil worship, nothing proven, everything poisonous. Medieval minds didn't need proof. They needed a story that explained why the holy now smelled of smoke. Philip leaned hard on Pope Clement V, a pontiff caught between conscience and a French crown breathing down his neck. Clement stalled. Philip didn't. He choreographed one of the most synchronized takedowns Europe had ever seen. A single date, secret orders, troops ready, torturers primed. And then cold dawn, Friday, October 13th, 1307, silence shattered. Across France, doors splintered, prayers cut off mid-syllable, steel flashed in candlelight. Templars were dragged from bunks and chapels alike, some still buckling armor, others clutching rosaries. No warnings, no chances. In Paris, Grand Master Jacques de Molay was seized. Man who'd once safeguarded France's own crown jewels, now manacled by that same crown. Commanderies were emptied, vaults pried open, ledgers seized. The charge sheet read like a demon's wish list: heresy, sodomy, idol worship, secret kisses on forbidden icons. Philip's lawyers had scripted the sins. His interrogators would ring out confirmations. Under racks and irons, some confessions came quick, others only when bones snapped and breath rattled. It was treason draped in piety, and tragically it worked. Public opinion wavered. The Pope caved, inch by inch. The order that had once thundered through battle lines now sat chained in stone cells, fighting an enemy no lance could pierce. Accusation. Friday the 13th entered Western superstition not with broken mirrors, but with broken men, bleeding night brothers blinking at torches in subterranean halls. Feel the echo of that lock turning as you sink deeper into rest. A story that began with 9 poor nights and a vow ends, for now, in shadowed dungeons and smoky council chambers. Yet legends don't die the way bodies do. They sink, they smolder, they wait. Let that thought cradle you. Purpose can be taken, power can be twisted, but myth learns to whisper in the dark. Close your eyes. The next page is patient. You feel the torches before you see them. Heat licking damp stone, chains rattling down corridors that once rang with prayer. In an age drunk on fear and holy zeal, truth didn't need to be factual. It only had to feel possible. So the Templars were broken with tools, not arguments. Racks groaned, boots tightened, irons hissed. Pain squeezed words from throats until confessions slid out like blood. They admitted to spitting on the cross, to kissing brothers in shuttered rites, to bowing before a severed head called Baphomet. Even Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself, signed what agony demanded, then later took those words back. It was theater dressed as justice. A bankrupt king murdering his creditors by accusing them of sins so grotesque no one dared rise in their defense. Philip IV's genius was cruelty wrapped in procedure. He didn't swing swords, he stamped seals. He drew a circle no knight could ride out of. Accuse them of the unthinkable, torture them until they confess, then point to their own mouths as proof. Pope Clement V, pinned between conscience and a French monarch's iron will, tried to slow the avalanche, to investigate on church terms. But Philip had already pushed. In England and across Iberia, judges frowned, hesitated, sometimes released the brothers. In France, the gears never paused. Commanderies were raided, coffers cracked, only to reveal missing treasure. Ledgers disappeared. Whispers bloomed. The hoard was gone because it had been spirited away. No gold, only guarded knowledge. Relics wrapped in cloth. Perhaps a grail, perhaps an ark. There was no evidence, only shadows, but in medieval minds, shadows counted. By 1312, the verdict was baked in. Under pressure that felt like a mailed fist at his throat, Clement convened the Council of Vienne and issued Vox in Excelso, the bull that erased the order for the sake of peace. Everyone heard the lie humming beneath the Latin. On parchment, their lands slid to the Hospitallers. In transit, much simply evaporated, lost, absorbed by royal treasuries, or tucked away by hands no one could trace. The quiet empire of ledgers and locked wagons dissolved like breath on glass. A military brotherhood turned, on paper, into nothing. But the last act still waited. Paris, March 1314. After 7 long, airless years, de Molay and Geoffroy de Charny were dragged to a wooden platform on a tiny island in the Seine. 2 worn men, wrists bound, eyes steady. They withdrew, every confession torn from them under torment. For that defiance, the sentence hardened, from life to flame. The wood was lit, smoke rolled low over the river, and through it de Molay's voice rose, calling on God to judge his judges. Legend says he named a year. Within months Clement lay ill and dead. Philip collapsed after a hunt. Divine justice or coincidence, people chose the version that made their skin prickle. The myth stuck. The last Grand Master died cursing, and heaven answered. So the order ended not with lances lowered but with parchment, shackles, and pyres. Yet endings in history rarely stay buried. The Red Cross slid off shields and reappeared in stories. The secrecy that once protected them now fed a fever of rumor. Where did the treasure go? Who smuggled the books? What relics slipped out under moonlight? Tales multiplied. A chalice hidden in the west. An ark beneath a rural chapel. Bloodlines guarded in silence. Tunnels under the Temple Mount mapped in code. Ships sliding out of La Rochelle under a moonless sky. No parchments, only murmurs. But in an age of relic hunters, murmurs were currency. Because when power loses its battlefield, it starts haunting basements and back rooms. When vows outlive their mission, they curdle into suspicion. Kings fear what they cannot tax. Crowds fear what they cannot see. And in that fear, imagination does the sharpening. Every tavern had a version. Every scriptorium a rumor tucked between illuminated lines. The papal seal tried to close their chapter. Legend pried it open again. Stripped of rank, scattered or slain, the brotherhood became something harder to burn. An idea. Power can be seized. Bodies can be broken. Names can be scratched from records. But mystery multiplies in darkness. And you, resting now between waking and dreaming, can still hear distant hoofbeats. They're not coming for war. They're carrying memory. Past kings, past popes, into that soft territory where questions glow warmer than answers. Between breaths you can almost feel a gauntlet brush your shoulder. Not in threat, but in reminder. Some fires never really die. So breathe slow. Let the clatter of chains turn to distant rain. Let parchment crinkle into lullaby. You are safe. The past cannot harm you here. Only teach, only tease, gently tugging you deeper into wonder. Let your eyes grow heavy. The torches dim, the dungeon stones cool. The stake's last embers fade to ash. The Templars are gone from the map, but not from the mind. Sleep now, knowing the story will be here when you return. Quieter, deeper, waiting with the next hidden door left unlocked just enough for you to push it open. You slip into the hush between heartbeat and breath, where legends hum louder than facts, and that's where the Templars keep riding. Official parchments said they were gone. Abolished, scattered, burned. But you can almost feel them ducking into the crowd, pulling hoods tight, vows whispering under their tongues. Some took other habits, some sold their swords, and some, so the rumors insist, went underground. Secret lodges, hidden chapels, rituals kept alive by candlelight and memory. Not proof, just possibility. And in an age hungry for meaning, possibility is tinder. Centuries stretched, and stories mutated. Suddenly those vanished nights were blamed or credited for everything ornate and inexplicable. Soaring Gothic spires, coded masons' marks, revolutions financed in shadowed back rooms. A brotherhood in white mantles manipulating thrones from behind velvet curtains. Novels, games, films turned them into guardians of bloodlines, keepers of forbidden relics, architects of invisible empires. Each retelling bent the truth, but fed the fascination, because myths do what archives can't. They stitch mystery into the gaps. Strip away the smoke and you're left with men of flesh and flaw, pious and proud, disciplined and dangerous, trying to reconcile prayer with the spear and paying for that collision in flame. Yet their imprint refuses to vanish. More than 700 years since Jacques de Molay's last curse smoldered over the Seine, the red cross still glows, etched in stone, tucked into heraldry, flickering on book covers and game screens. Bodies ended. The idea didn't. Remember what they actually built. In an age when kings clung to divine right and usury was sin, these monk knights stitched a financial web from London to Jerusalem. Letters of credit that worked like portable wealth. Commanderies that functioned like regional branches of a multinational. Grain counted, rents tallied, wagons scheduled. A prototype for global infrastructure, drafted not with stock tickers but with ledgers, seals, and absolute obedience. On the field, they rewired knighthood. Chivalry had been a personal boast. The Templars turned it into a rulebook. No freelance heroics, just units drilled like early special forces, ready to die for an idea larger than any banner. And die they did, quietly, repeatedly, often for gains that melted away with the next treaty. They proved faith could be harnessed, weaponized, in war, diplomacy, finance, and propaganda. And when they fell, that same faith, twisted into accusations, justified the pyres. Their collapse is its own parable. An institution insulated by privilege, answerable to no crown, richer than most kingdoms, suddenly discovered it had no friends when knives came out. Think of it as a medieval corporate takedown. Only the shareholders wore mitres and the CEO was a king who hated red ink. The lesson glows. No structure, however sanctified, is unbreakable. So when you catch a glimpse of a crimson cross on white cloth, let your mind wander. Once it was a badge worn by men convinced they were carrying God's will, until power, greed, and fear rewrote the script. Steel clashed, gold shifted, pyres flared, and legend was born in the ashes. Now feel the scene change like a page turning in your half-dreaming mind. Paris, 12th century. Markets buzzing, scholars arguing beneath cloisters, the church flexing muscle and marble. Ambition was a language everyone spoke. Princes, prelates, builders. In the middle of this rising hum stood a tired cathedral, Saint Etienne, crumbling and small, unworthy of a city swelling with pride. Enter Maurice de Sully, appointed bishop in 1160, a cleric with a planner's eye and a poet's reach. He didn't want a repair job, he wanted a statement in stone. Something that would catch sunlight and fling it into colored rivers across vaulted ceilings. A house of God big enough to make nobles blink and peasants weep. An edifice that said, Paris is not just living history, it is shaping it. He dreamed a nave that felt like a ship turned upright, pointed toward heaven. He imagined flying buttresses, bones of stone holding up walls laced with glass. He called for artisans, masons, glassmakers, engineers before the word existed. And slowly, like prayer answered in increments, a skeleton of limestone rose on the Isle de la Cite. Each column a promise, each arch a lifted voice, each pane of stained glass a sermon caught in light. You stand there now, in the soft dark behind your eyelids, hearing chisels tapping, ropes creaking, Latin murmurs floating in dusty air. The same city that centuries later would spin rumors about hidden Templar vaults first watched a different kind of miracle, faith translated into architecture. No secret cult needed, only vision, sweat, mathematics, and belief. Let that comfort you as you drift. Institutions fall, cathedrals rise, orders burn, legends bloom. Stone outlasts scandal and stories outlast stone. Your breathing slows with that thought. The red cross fades into a rose window. The crackle of pyres softens into the distant ring of hammers on stone. Sleep settles like ash, quiet, light, everywhere. And when you wake, The door back into this corridor of mysteries will still be ajar, waiting for your hand on the handle. You step into Paris as if through a half-open door. Mud on your boots, market cries in your ears, and then you look up. Something vast is waking on the Isle de la Cite. Not a fortress, not another squat Romanesque block of stone, but a vision stretched toward heaven like a prayer you can walk inside. Maurice de Sully, the bishop appointed in 1160, has dared the city to dream bigger. He doesn't want repairs. He wants a monument to the Virgin and a proclamation of the Church's might that will make even nobles feel small. Gothic, new, audacious, almost impossible, is the word on every mason's lips. In 1163, tradition says Pope Alexander III places the first stone, a ceremonial spark to ignite decades of labor. Work begins at the East End, the choir and apse, the heart where hymns will one day rise beneath vaults of glass and stone. But this is no quick project. Notre Dame isn't a building. It's a lifelong vow. Limestone is dragged from quarries, hoisted by hand, shaped by chisels that pass from father to son. Scaffolds scrape the clouds. Sweat darkens timber planks. Craftsmen carve saints into columns, trace scripture in stone ribs, and set panes of colored glass that will turn sunlight into story. Most will never see the towers finished. They build anyway, their reward pinned to eternity, not approval. By the 1170s, the skeleton stands taller. In a city of cramped timber houses, the cathedral rises like a sermon in stone. Gothic is no longer a rumor. It is a revolution. The old rule, thick walls, dim light, gets thrown aside. Pointed arches take the strain and drive it downward. Ribbed vaults leap like stone bones, guiding every eye and soul upward. And light, that was the masterstroke. Massive stained glass windows bloom, pouring scripture in color across the floor. The church doesn't just tell stories now. It bathes you in them. Columns are more than supports. They're saints in procession. Arches are not decoration. They're thresholds to salvation. Theology is written in limestone, and the masons are its scribes. Outside, Paris is changing too. Markets cluster at the cathedral's feet. Bargemen on the Seine hear Latin chants ride the breeze. Students from the newborn University of Paris huddle under its shadow to argue Aristotle and grace. Notre Dame isn't just rising into the skyline. It's burrowing into the city's identity, a heartbeat of stone and light. Progress is slow, no cranes, no motors, just muscle, rope, and patience. When one worker falls, another climbs. Names are forgotten, but the work remembers them. By 1200, the choir is alive with song and the nave's outline is firm against the sky. The miracle has shape now. Arches entwined, glass blazing, walls whispering of what still must come. Ambition swells. The builders reach higher, stretch wider, and that's when the problem appears. Wait, those glorious vaults don't just press down. They push out, threatening to pry the walls apart like a book forced too wide. Romanesque churches solve this by thickening everything, shrinking windows to slits. But Notre Dame was conceived to breathe, to glow, to feel like the inside of heaven. Thick walls would choke the dream, so the masons gamble on a radical idea barely tested: the flying buttress. Not an afterthought, but a daring armature of stone, arching from high walls to stout piers beyond the nave. Think of them as wings, skeletal, elegant, catching the outward shove of the vaults and delivering it safely to the earth. Suddenly, the impossible holds. The ceiling can soar. The walls can open. Light can flood in without tearing the place apart. From the street, those arches look like grace made visible, strength worn outside the skin. You pause there, in that twilight between thought and sleep, and feel what they felt. The tremor of risk, the thrill of solving gravity with geometry and faith. This wasn't vanity. It was devotion measured in tons and timbers. The first stone was only a promise. What followed reshaped not just Paris's skyline, but Europe's soul. Stone by stone, glass by glass, vault by vault, Notre Dame taught a continent to look up and believe that weight could float, that darkness could blaze, that human hands, guided by something larger, could carve worship into the very air. Let your breath fall into rhythm with those long-vanished hammers. Let the glow of imagined rose windows soften the edges of your thoughts. Generations carried this dream forward. Now you carry it gently into sleep. The scaffolds creak, the ropes sway, the last mason climbs down. Night settles over the island, and the cathedral, unfinished yet eternal, keeps rising in your mind, one quiet heartbeat at a time. You tilt your head back and swear the stone is breathing. Lacework in limestone, wings of rock arcing through open air. Those flying buttresses, so slender from the street, feel like miracles masquerading as math. They weren't in the first sketches. Early Gothic dreamers hadn't yet grasped what those stone arms could do. But as Notre Dame climbed, vaults stretching, walls thinning, the fabric strained. The masons pivoted mid-creation, bolting poetry onto necessity. They swung those arches out like rib bones to catch the outward shove of the vaults and pour it harmlessly into the earth. To some eyes, they scarred the silhouette. To most, they looked like angels frozen mid-flight, holding the cathedral aloft. And once the pressure slipped off the inner walls, the builders got greedy for light. Window after window opened like eyes. Then the great roses bloomed. Vast wheels of glass were saints, angels, and the end of days spun in color. No longer did God's stories arrive only from pulpits. Now sunlight preached them in rubies and sapphires across the nave floor. Imagine standing there at dawn, scripture turning the air into stained fire. By the early 1200s, the eastern end was singing, so attention swung west, to the face everyone would meet first. The west facade had a job: humble you before you even crossed the threshold. Doors stretched impossibly high, and above them a tribunal of stone. Prophets, kings, demons watched every step. You weren't just entering a building, you were walking into a verdict. Those twin towers began to rise around the 1220s, brick by painstaking brick, until they loomed nearly 70 meters over Paris. Plans once imagined needle spires, but what remained were two broad, flat crowns. Fortress flat, formidable, somehow more honest than any point. Between them ran the Gallery of Kings, 28 statues meant to show the monarchs of Judah holding court. Centuries later, revolutionaries mistook them for French kings and sent their heads tumbling. But in the 13th century, they proclaimed a tidy message: divine order, sacred rule, throne and altar marching together. Beneath them, three portals preached in stone. The center door, the last judgment, stops you cold. Christ enthroned, angels sorting souls, demons clawing the damned. For a people who couldn't read parchment, this was doctrine carved at eye level. Step carefully. Eternity begins inside. Above the portals, another rose unfurled, nearly 10 meters wide, bordered by tracery so intricate it feels like frozen lace, flanked by the Virgin and Child. When sunlight struck it right, color spilled like a divine spotlight, casting saints across pillars and pews. By the mid-1200s, the facade stood finished, symmetrical, solemn, overwhelming. A billboard for God's authority, a warning sign for sin. But the builders weren't done. A face needs a body, a crown needs a soul. So they turned inward, to the crossing, the roofline, the arms that would make this church a cruciform heartbeat. The transepts, those lateral wings, became the next canvas. Under the hands of masters like Jean de Chelles and Pierre de Montreuil, new roses blossomed north and south, each a sermon in hue. The northern window breathed cool blues and purples. Wisdom, prophecy, the ancient covenant. The southern blazed in warm reds and golds. Incarnation, passion, the fire of the new. Two halves of salvation talking to each other in light. Stand there in your mind's quiet now. The nave stretching like a ship's hull toward the choir, voices ready to rise. King's footsteps worn into the floor, candles trembling beneath vaulted ribs that point like prayer. Hundreds of nameless hands lifted all this. Blacksmiths bending iron cramps, carpenters lashing timbers into cranes, stonecutters carving saints no one would ever know they made. They worked knowing they'd never see the final spire kiss the sky. They built for God, for Paris, for children unborn. Faith was their wage. Time was their tool. And all of it. Every flying arch, every shard of glass, every block set by calloused palms. turned a risky idea into a living cathedral of air and light. Notre Dame became what those first lines on parchment only hinted at: a hymn in architecture, a proof that belief can be measured not just in prayers but in pressure loads and buttress thrusts. A place where geometry kneels to grace and gravity is persuaded, kindly, to cooperate. Let that thought settle like dust in a sunbeam as you drift. The buttresses still reach. The roses still burn. The towers still judge in silence. You can leave your worries at the great doors for now. Let stone saints keep watch while you rest. Close your eyes. Feel the cool of the nave, the glow through glass, the slow, patient heartbeat of a city that once looked up and decided to build heavenward. Sleep. The wings of stone will hold. You walk in and the stone seems to breathe. Columns lifting like ancient trees, trunks of limestone rising until their ribs meet overhead, palms pressed together in a silent prayer 35 meters above your head. This isn't just architecture. It's choreography, every line and arch urging your gaze, and your spirit upward. At the center, the altar waits. Relics cradled in gold, incense drifting like whispered vows. Here kings bent their knees, queens whispered oaths, popes offered blessings. Coronations, royal weddings, funeral masses. Notre Dame became the nation's stage, where France performed its soul. But it was never only a theater for the crowned. Merchants slipped in with dust on their sleeves. Peasants shuffled forward with coins and hope. Pilgrims limped to chapels to plead for mercy. Priests thundered from pulpits. Choirs lifted hymns. And somewhere a desperate mother lit a candle for a sick child. Every surface preached. Sculptures murmured parables from niches. Stained glass poured scripture in color. Even the floor tiles drew pathways of meaning. The cathedral didn't just shelter faith. It staged it, again and again, until belief hung in the air as tangibly as smoke. By the late 13th century, the interior throbbed with life. Choir stalls carved, chapels finished, relics enthroned. The heart beat strong, but the body still needed a crown. Notre Dame had a face, those towers, a heart, the choir, and wings, the transepts. Yet nothing pierced the sky to point beyond itself. So plans unfurled for the spire. Unlike the squat, muscular towers, the spire would be a blade of devotion, slender, vertical, rising from the crossing where nave and transept meet. Built of oak and sheathed in lead, it was a balancing act between weight and wind. Carpenters hauled beams with muscle and prayer. Smiths wrapped joints in iron, every pulley creaking like a psalm. When it finally stood, it wasn't just an ornament. It was an exclamation point, a final upward thrust. Here, Godward. Around it, creatures crept from the stone. Gargoyles, grotesque and glorious, lunged from cornices, mouths open to spit rain clear of fragile walls. Some were plumbing, some were warnings, all were symbols. Carvings that dared sin to come closer and reminded sinners what waited if they did. Alongside them, chimeras crouched, fantastic hybrids, half nightmare, half marvel. Eyes fixed forever on Paris, a Gothic obsession with mystery frozen in bestial poses. Inside, finishing touches multiplied. Chapels gleamed, choir stalls whispered with the polish of countless hands. Reliquaries glinted in candlelight. The cathedral hummed like a sacred machine. Rituals timed, bells tuned, light choreographed through glass. It took more than a century of labor, tens of thousands of anonymous artisans, and the stubborn faith of a kingdom to arrive here. By 1345, almost 200 years after that first stone, Notre Dame was declared complete. Except complete was always a polite fiction. Stone settles, fires strike, revolutions rage. Notre Dame would be repaired, reinvented, resurrected across the ages. But by the 14th century, the great work stood. Gothic ambition had delivered its masterpiece. From then on, it wasn't just a cathedral, it was the cathedral. For 4 centuries, it presided over Paris like a sentinel of faith and crown. Bells rang out for victories and sounded mournfully at defeats. Monarchs crossed its threshold ordinary and emerged anointed, the vaults sealing their rule in sacred authority. Generals, bishops, foreign envoys, all passed under those portals to bargain, to beg, to boast. When plague crawled through the streets or famine gnawed at bellies, Parisians flooded the nave, candles flaring, processions winding, desperate eyes lifted toward the vaults. Politically, Notre Dame anchored the monarchy's soul. The message was simple every time those great doors opened. Heaven approves this throne. Spiritually, it anchored the people's fears and hopes. The building watched, patient and immovable, while centuries changed their masks. Empires rose, revolutions burned, fashions flipped, but the stone kept breathing. So let yourself drift under that ceiling now. Feel the ribs overhead press your worries upward. The colored lights soften the edges of your thoughts. Somewhere a gargoyle grins, a chimera stares, a saint in stone holds steady. You are safe under these arches of air and light. Rest. The spire points the way. The towers stand guard. The flying buttresses hold the weight. Sleep, knowing generations built this refuge for moments just like this, when all you need is a place that reaches higher so you can finally let go. You stand on the Isle de la Cite, the city's pulse under your feet, and feel how every flag, every oath, every whispered prayer once funneled toward the stone giant. Priests lifted banners here before armies marched, stitching divine mandate to royal blood. If a king ruled France, Notre Dame gripped his soul. Pilgrims trudged for days to glimpse a sliver of the crown of thorns. Feast days shook the vaults as the great organ thundered and choirs threaded daring polyphony through incense-thick air. Nothing stayed still. Styles shifted, liturgy morphed, music stretched its wings. The cathedral kept absorbing it all, as if stone could learn. By the 1600s and 1700s, tastes turned glossy and baroque. Gothic looked old, too jagged, too shadowed. Plans surfaced to smooth, tame, modernize what earlier builders had risked. Yet the towers endured storms and centuries. Bells still rolled across the Seine, even as the ground beneath the institution trembled. Born of faith, crowned by kings, Notre Dame was about to meet a force stone alone couldn't withstand. Revolution. The people rose, and with them a fury aimed squarely at thrones and altars. For centuries, the cathedral had embodied both. Rage became chisel. Crowds surged inside, 28 statues of Judah's kings along the facade, mistaken for French monarchs, lost their heads to the mob. Altars were shattered, sculpture hammered to dust. Bells that once tolled for royal births were ripped down and poured into cannon molds. The crown of thorns was spirited away. Many relics vanished into hiding or history. In 1793, the church was officially deconsecrated. No longer a sanctuary, it was rechristened the Temple of Reason, site of festivals for human enlightenment. Later, it stored wine. Imagine that nave, built for hymns, reeking of damp barrels and spilled vats. The spire, rotting and unsafe, came down. Gargoyles crashed, the roof leaked, rats took the crypt. Paris's heart seemed hollow, a ruin left to sag in the city's center. And still it survived. Power knows power, and Napoleon recognized the symbol he could wield. In 1804, he scrubbed and staged just enough grandeur to crown himself emperor beneath those vaults, snatching the diadem from the Pope's hands in one theatrical gesture. Notre Dame served authority again, but the sacred charge had thinned to spectacle. Decades of neglect, though, left deep scars. By the 1830s, collapses threatened, demolition was whispered. Some Parisians argued for a clean slate, tear down the medieval shadow and raise something worthy of the age. Then a writer listened to the stones. Victor Hugo's 1831 novel, Notre Dame de Paris, was not just a tale of a bell ringer and a gypsy. It was a battle cry for memory. Hugo painted the cathedral as wounded yet alive, misunderstood yet magnificent. He made readers feel its ribs, its scars, its stubborn beauty. The city woke up, startled by what it almost abandoned. A groundswell rose. Save it. By 1844, King Louis Philippe signed off on a full restoration. Two architects led the charge, Eugene Viollet-le-Duc and Jean-Baptiste Lassus, with a mission larger than patchwork. They aimed to give the cathedral its soul back. Weather-eaten statues were replaced, the decapitated kings returned to their gallery, and the lost spire was reborn. This time taller, finer, 96 meters of oak and lead lancing the Paris sky. Viollet-le-Duc's vision didn't just rebuild. It reimagined, weaving 19th century craft into 13th century dreams until the seams vanished. So here you are, in the hush after centuries of shouts, feeling banners blessed for war, hearing a bell that melted into cannon, watching a crown plucked from a pope, seeing a novelist's ink turn into scaffolding. Notre Dame has been temple and warehouse, throne room and ruin, stage and sanctuary. It has been broken and rebuilt, hated and adored. And through all of it, the stone kept breathing. Let that hold you now. Power falls, styles fade, revolutions scorch. A book can rescue, a craftsman can heal. The cathedral teaches resilience in limestone. Faith can be burned, but wonder regenerates. Close your eyes under those vaults of thought. The organ sleeps. The roses still burn with captured sun. Somewhere above, a gargoyle grins at time. Rest. The heart of Paris is steady again. And for this moment, it beats with yours. You watch the Paris night flicker on the Seine and feel the silhouette cut against the sky. Towers steady, windows glowing like captured constellations. Through the 19th and 20th centuries, Notre Dame slipped back into her role as Paris's spiritual heartbeat. Masses whispered beneath her vaults. Liberation ceremonies thundered through her nave. 2 world wars passed under her gaze. During the Nazi occupation, her bells fell silent like a held breath. In 1944, when the city was freed, they roared again, shaking dust from stone as if history itself exhaled. Then came April 15, 2019. Flames crawled beneath the roof, ancient oak beams, the forest, some cut in the 1200s, catching like dry tinder. The spire, a 19th century arrow of oak and lead, folded and fell in a gasp of smoke. The world watched, hearts clenched, as centuries seemed to vanish in minutes. Yet when dawn came, the great tower still stood. The rose windows still shimmered. Relics, saved by brave hands, rested safely. And a vow rose louder than sirens. We will rebuild, because Notre Dame is more than stone. She is memory, identity, resilience. Proof that beauty can burn and still return brighter. Let that ember glow as we sail east, where another fire burned in a very different heart. She was born in 1775 somewhere in Guangdong. No birth record, no soft cradle of nobility, just a name history borrowed from her husband, Zhang Yi, wife of Zhang Yi. Before she wore that title, she worked the floating brothels of Canton. Flower boats drifting on muddy water, serving merchants, officers, pirates. But she wasn't merely a comfort. She was a collector of secrets, names, leverage. She listened. She bartered information like coin. Enter Zhang Yi, commander of the Red Flag Fleet, a pirate lord with an armada already feared across the South China Sea. He'd met women before. He'd never met her. She agreed to marry him, but only with terms. Joint command, shared power, a say in alliances, spoils, strategy. He accepted, whether from love or calculation, because he recognized in her the sharpest blade he'd ever wield. They wed in 1801. While Zhang Yi conquered on the waves, she mapped the politics beneath them, studying rival captains, spotting weak loyalties, turning enemies into clients. When he died suddenly in 1807, perhaps a typhoon, perhaps fate, everyone expected the fleet to splinter. Instead, it snapped to attention. She moved fast, not with brute force but with design. Secured the Red Flag Command, brokered oaths, and married Zhang Yi's adopted son and lieutenant, Cheng Po-tsai, cementing loyalty and military muscle in a single stroke. From brothel girl to pirate queen, in less than a decade. But queen barely covers it. She didn't inherit a gang. She refined a nation at sea. Contemporary accounts put her command at more than 300 ships within months, soon doubling, tripling. Some estimates climb to 1,500 or even 1,800 vessels, up to 70,000 pirates under her signal, more than many European navies could muster. How? Not just fear, structure. She wrote a code. Loot divided by rule, not whim. Theft from the common treasury meant death. Harming a female captive without permission, death again. Swift, brutal clarity. She bound captains to her not by charm alone, but by a system that made sense in blood and silver. Her psychology was razor-edged. Reward loyalty spectacularly, punish betrayal theatrically, make the rules stronger than any one man's temper. She understood pirates weren't just wolves, they were a pack, and packs need law. Under her, the Red Flag Fleet became a floating empire. Taxes extracted from coastal villages, treaties negotiated and broken, with Qing officials, Portuguese traders, even the British. A woman in a world of knives, she gripped the handle. And like Notre Dame, she adapted when storms came. When imperial pressure finally tightened, she didn't die on a deck with a cutlass in hand. She negotiated amnesty on her terms. She kept her fortune, retired peacefully, and lived out her days running a gambling house. No martyrdom, no pyre, just an exit signed in ink rather than blood. Power, used wisely, can choose when to set itself down. So breathe with that thought. A cathedral scorched but standing. A pirate queen who wrote laws on the waves and walked away alive. Resilience wears many faces. Oak beams and limestone ribs, red flags and iron codes. You can feel it settling into your own bones now. The knowledge that collapse is not the same as ending, that reinvention is quieter than legend but twice as strong. Close your eyes. Let bells fade into ocean wind. Let stained glass colors blur into lantern light on black water. Notre Dame's spire will rise again. Zhang Yisaw's story will keep slipping between fact and myth. And you, safe, warm, drifting, carry both in the quiet places of your mind. Sleep. The stones will hold. The fleet will keep watch. Tomorrow the tale continues. Tonight let wonder do the sailing. You can almost taste the salt and gunpowder as the lantern light schemes across black water. Her water. Under Zhang Yisaw, the South China Sea didn't just belong to pirates. It followed policy. Run once, and you lost your ears and your pride. Marched before the fleet as a living cautionary tale. Run for good and steel met neck. Fear set the edges, but it wasn't the only glue. She offered something rarer than terror. Order, protection, profit. 20% of every haul stayed with the taker. The other 80 flowed into a communal chest she controlled. Widow stipends, ship repairs, bribes, emergency rations. Everyone ate because everyone contributed. Stability tasted better than chaos. Her armada wasn't a mob. It was a rainbow-coated machine. 6 squadrons. Red, black, white, blue, yellow, green. Each a floating province with its own captain, all answering to her signal. The Red Squadron, elite and deadly, sailed under her closest ally and second-in-command, Chung Putzai. Together they oversaw a sea state stretching from Vietnam's coves to Hong Kong's harbors. Taxing villages, skimming trade routes, raiding imperial posts, and collecting tribute like monarchs in motion. The Qing dynasty had a navy. Zhang Yisaw had an empire. Forget the ale-soaked caricatures of pirates singing off-key beneath ragged flags. Her decks functioned like a disciplined corporation. At the center lay her code, no romance, just rules. Loot went straight to the central storehouse before a single coin jingled in a private pocket. 20% back to the raider, the rest into the collective pool. Touch that pool and you forfeited your head. Cowardice in battle? Flogging, drowning, or worse. Disobey orders, expect pain. Desert twice, expect death. And she carved lines even around desire. Seize a woman, and you treat her with respect or face beheading. Not mercy, structure. She was less interested in kindness than control, and the code gave her both. What made the system brilliant wasn't only punishment, it was belonging. Prisoners and coastal folk were invited in, sworn to her laws in exchange for safety and a share. Fear drew some, admiration others. Many simply realized piracy under Zhang Yisaw was safer, more predictable, and oddly fairer than life beneath corrupt officials. Villages that paid tribute kept autonomy and slept at night. Villages that resisted met fire. Choose a queen or face the flames. Most chose wisely. By 1808, her nuisance had become a national nightmare. Trade stuttered, towns smoldered, and imperial pride curdled. The Qing court responded with fleets, banners snapping, drums pounding, and sailed straight into humiliation. Battle after battle, Zhang Yi saw's ships dance circles around heavier, slower war junks. She read tides like ledgers, slipped through shallows, vanished behind islands, struck with storms at her back. Her crews swapped vessels mid-fight, sprang ambushes from fog, swallowed entire squadrons and repainted the sails by dusk. Morale told the rest of the story. Qing officers, underpaid and suspicious of one another, broke when pressed. Her men, wired tight to the code and rewarded when victorious, held formation like a tide wall. Imperial squadrons vanished into her ranks, their ships suddenly flying new colors. Desperation finally pushed the dynasty to beg help from Europeans. Portuguese cannon, British hulls. Anything to slow the woman who turned open water into her courtroom. And here you are, floating in that in-between space where sleep gathers, the creak of rigging in your ear, a cathedral's bell fading in your memory, two kinds of power braided across oceans and centuries. One built in stone and glass, saved by story. The other built on waves and fear, saved by law. Both nearly lost, both reborn. Let your breath match the roll of a calm sea. Picture color-coded sails drifting under a moonless sky, rules etched in the minds of thousands, a sovereign without a throne ruling by code and consequence. Picture limestone wings holding gravity at bay, rose windows catching firelight and sunrise, a city's heart stitched back together after flames. Resilience wears many faces: oak beams, iron chains, flying buttresses, flying colors. Close your eyes now. The fleet is on watch. The buttresses still hold. Tomorrow, another chapter waits. New stones to set, new currents to read. Tonight, sink gently. You are safe on this tide of stories, carried by those who refuse to sink or crumble. Sleep. The code stands. The towers stand. And you quietly do too. You taste the salt on the wind and the iron on your tongue as cannon smoke drifts low. Yet even in the crush of battle, you feel her calculating. Foreign sails crowd the horizon. Qing war junks, Portuguese frigates, Cantonese gunboats. Their broadsides thunder heavier, their hulls sit higher, but they don't know these reefs, these fickle tides, this bossy monsoon. She does. So when the noose tightens in 1809, Zhang Yi Saw doesn't panic. She pivots. Feints, retreats that are really coils, counterstrikes that slice pride from empire. She isn't merely surviving the storm. She's turning it into someone else's shame. But storms are expensive. Powder runs low, planks splinter. Men grow thin-eyed and restless. Even a sea-born empire erodes under endless surf. Zhang Yi reads the ledger in blood and silver and sees the truth. Supremacy isn't always about the last cannon fired. Sometimes it's about stepping off the deck with everything you came for. No shackles, no scaffold, just a new script. By 1810, she's accomplished the absurd. Humbled the Qing, embarrassed European guns, ruled the trade winds. Yet she's no romantic martyr. Supplies shrink, allies grumble, hulls creak. She shifts weapons from broadsides to bargaining. She sails into Guangzhou herself, flags snapping defiantly, guards at her back. Not a supplicant, an equal. Terms not please. Amnesty. For all of them, thousands of pirates, men, women, children. Wealth untouched. Her husband and second in command, Cheng Po-tsai, to be commissioned proper rank in the Qing Navy. The court gapes. But exhaustion makes tyrants pragmatic. They sign what they cannot seize. April 18, 1810. Imagine it. 17,000 of the world's most feared outlaws gliding into port in procession. Not chains. 200-plus ships surrendered with ceremony. Weapons stacked like offerings. The Red Flag Confederation dissolved without a single drop of fresh blood. No mass trials. No public executions. No forfeited fortune. Cheng Po-tsai becomes a naval officer. Zhang Yi steps ashore, free, unbowed, pockets heavy. Most pirate tales end under a blade or a noose. Hers pauses mid-stride on a city street, and then she rewrites herself again. Canton, modern Guangzhou, becomes home. Respectable? Not exactly. Comfortable? Absolutely. She opens a gambling house, Moves opium like someone who understands margins and risk. Illegal? Technically. Ignored? Conveniently. Influence makes good camouflage. No need to build another empire when you already know how to hold power quietly. Chung Patsai hunts pirates for the very government that couldn't cage him. She mines the books, the contacts, the flow. Wealth protected, reputation whispered, danger defanged. What's astonishing isn't simply that she lived. It's how deliberately she chose how to live. Born nameless and poor, sold to a floating brothel. She clawed to the top of a world carved out by men with knives and tempers. Then, refusing the script of gallows or gunfire, she negotiated her exit and died in her own bed in 1844, 69 years old. No repentance tour, no tearful absolution, just a final, quiet defiance. I made the rules, I kept the spoils, I left when I was ready. Let that lesson rock you gently now. Power can be a cannon, yes, but it can also be a contract. Survival can wear armor or silk. Somewhere out on that black water, red banners fold down neatly. Somewhere in Paris, bells answer flames with resolve. Stone and sail, buttress and brigantine. Two very different giants surviving by knowing when to stand, when to bend, when to vanish, when to rise. Your breathing slows to the rhythm of a tide. The fleet dissolves into mist. The spire reappears in scaffolding and light. You are held between them by law and legend, by fire and flood. Sleep slides in like a calm current. The code is written, the towers still stand, and you, quiet, steady, drift exactly where you need to be. You feel the deck sway under your feet and realize it isn't the sea that's moving. It's history, shifting to make room for a woman who refused to shrink. In an age when most women were expected to whisper behind screens, Zhang Yi saw Qingxi, commanded colors on the horizon. Fleets, treaties, entire currents of commerce, and then chose to leave the stage richer and freer than any pirate before her. Her guns went silent, her flags lowered, but her wake still ripples across the South China Sea. Think of the names you were fed first. Blackbeard, Bartholomew Roberts, Henry Morgan, Caribbean terrors who burned brightly and died violently. In their shadow stands a figure who outperformed them on nearly every scale. She didn't helm a handful of ships. She directed armadas. She didn't loot a port or two. She throttled regions. And she didn't end on a rope or under a volley. She folded her empire, signed her own terms, and walked ashore unbroken. That wasn't luck. That was design, strategy, a razor mind that understood leverage as well as tide charts. She was part tactician, part politician, part psychologist, balancing terror with order, fear with fairness, punishment with paydays. Loyalty wasn't a feeling, it was a framework, and she built it with the precision of someone who knew power collapses without rules. Most astonishing, she did it inside Qing-era China, where Confucian codes penned women into obedience. She didn't just test that pen. She snapped it. Hardened captains answered her. A dynasty sat down to negotiate. She ended a career not in shackles, but in silk. Yet look for her in Western pop histories and you'll find silence. Why? Because her arc refuses the familiar script. She wasn't a tragic rogue. She didn't blaze out in glory. She wasn't European, and she was terrifyingly effective. That unsettles tidy narratives built by men about men. Qing records barely acknowledge her beyond the relief of her disappearance. Who wants to celebrate the woman who exposed your naval impotence and left with your dignity in her purse? Western chroniclers preferred parrots and rum to ledgers and law codes. Negotiated success doesn't make for a swashbuckling poster. So she was sidelined, less mythologized, more misfiled. But legends are stubborn. Feminist scholars, maritime historians, storytellers who cherish inconvenient truths. One by one, they've hauled her back on deck. Documentaries, novels, games have started sketching her outline. The brothel girl who bartered secrets, the wife who demanded partnership, the widow who seized a navy, the sovereign who disbanded it on her own schedule. We still don't know her birth name. We read her through Qing memos and European journals, enemies and outsiders, but even their grudging lines are enough to trace a silhouette of steel. She wore no crown because she didn't need the permission it implied. Authority radiated from cannon smoke and shouted orders, from a code carved into hearts by reward and fear. Her territory had no borders, only horizons, from the Gulf of Tonkin to Guangdong's shores. What she built wasn't a rabble. It was a polity afloat. Trade taxed, justice meted, treaties signed, discipline enforced. Captains weren't freelancers. They were officers. Crews weren't mobs. They were citizens of a floating nation. And her final maneuver remains unmatched. Most pirate tales end in splinters and fire. Hers ends with quills and stamps, negotiation, retirement, wealth intact. She didn't sink with her ship. She stepped off it, with a ledger balanced and a legend secured. By 1844, when she died at 69, she had achieved what emperors, generals, and outlaw kings rarely do. She let go of absolute power on her own terms. No marble statue bears her face. No palace porch carries her name. Yet her shadow rides the swells, felt in the whispers of sailors, in the margins of history where women refuse erasure. In every mind that understands leadership is claimed, not gifted. Greatness never waits for an invitation. Zhang Yisao didn't knock. She took the ocean. Now let that certainty rock you gently towards sleep. Hear the low murmur of thousands obeying a single voice across dark water. See far away a red flag folding at dusk. Not in defeat, but in decision. Feel how the world shifts when someone refuses the script written for them. Breathe. The cannons are quiet. The spire is rising again. And the sea is calm. Power can whisper as well as roar. Close your eyes. Her sails are gone. But her tide is still beneath you, steady and sure.